At my son's lavish wedding reception, his new wife Bethany grabbed the microphone during the toasts. She publicly shamed me, calling me a cheapskate and demanding an $80,000 check right in front of everyone. My son Liam stood by, silent. I simply smiled, excused myself, and walked out. But they had no idea about the secret I held. Follow my story to see what happened next. Like, share, and let me know the city you're listening from. The grand ballroom of the Grand View Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and the hushed murmur of hundreds of well-dressed guests. Silk draperies cascaded from the lofty ceiling, and tables laden with exquisite floral arrangements held the promise of an extravagant feast. This was Liam and Bethany's wedding reception, a spectacle of opulence that made Alara feel like an accidental intruder. She had arrived in her 10-year-old Honda, its paint faded by countless suns, and now stood awkwardly in her modest navy blue dress, feeling the stark contrast to the shimmering gowns and tailored suits that had surrounded her. A young woman in a crisp black uniform, one of Bethany's wedding planners, approached Alara with a tight, almost condescending smile. "Mrs. Hayes, your seat is at table 17. Alara nodded, her heart sinking a little. Table 17. She knew without needing to ask that it would be tucked away in a corner, far from the elevated head table where Liam, her son, sat beaming beside his radiant new wife, Bethany. It was Bethany's design, of course. Alara had never quite fit into Bethany's carefully curated world of designer labels and social status, and this seating arrangement was just another subtle, yet pointed reminder of her place. From her obscure vantage point, nestled between a distant cousin she barely recognized and a bewildered elderly aunt from Bethany's side, Alara watched Liam. He looked utterly happy, his face alight with a joy she hadn't seen in him for years. Bethany, draped in white lace that shimmered under the spotlights, leaned into him, whispering something that made him laugh. A pang of bittersweet emotion tightened Alara's chest. Her son was happy. That was what mattered then, wasn't it? Even if it meant she felt increasingly marginalized in his life. She took a slow, deep breath, reminding herself to focus on his happiness, not her discomfort. The evening progressed with choreographed precision. After a lavish meal, the toast began. Bethany's mother, a formidable woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a string of pearls, rose first. Her voice, smooth and resonant, filled the room as she delivered a polished speech full of well-rehearsed anecdotes and veiled boasts about her daughter's accomplishments. It was eloquent, sophisticated, and entirely devoid of genuine warmth. Alara listened, her own small, handwritten cards clutched in her trembling hands beneath the table. She had spent weeks crafting her speech, pouring her heart into words of love, remembrance, and hope for Liam and Bethany's future. It wasn't eloquent, perhaps, but it was sincere. When Bethany's mother concluded to polite applause, the master of ceremonies announced, "Next, we have Alara Hayes, Liam's mother, who would like to share a few words." Alara's hands trembled visibly now as she rose, her modest dress feeling even plainer under the glittering lights. She navigated the crowded tables, her carefully practiced smile feeling stiff on her lips. As she approached the microphone, a wave of nervous energy washed over her. She reached for the stand, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. This was it, her chance to tell Liam how much she loved him, how proud she was, and to offer her blessings to Bethany. "Hello, everyone," Alara began, her voice a little shaky, but filled with an earnest warmth. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Liam's mother, Alara. I remember Liam as a little boy, always curious, always kind. I wish I could tell you about the countless nights I spent." Her words hung in the air, abruptly cut short by a sudden sharp sound. Bethany, who had been laughing a moment before, had slammed her palm flat on the head table, the unexpected noise echoing through the room. Alara looked up, her heart lurching. Bethany's face was flushed, her eyes blazing with an anger that seemed to come out of nowhere. She pushed her chair back, scraping it loudly against the polished floor, and stalked towards Alara. "That's enough!" Bethany's voice, usually modulated and sweet, was a harsh, cutting whisper that nonetheless carried to every corner of the silent room. She snatched the microphone from Alara's bewildered grasp, her fingers digging into the plastic. Alara stumbled back a step, caught off guard. Bethany turned to the stunned crowd, her expression a venomous sneer. "Honestly, this is just typical. The old cheapskate isn't paying anything toward this wedding, not a dime. And she thinks she can just stand up here and give some sob story? Do you know what she brought us as a gift? A measly photo album. Her voice rose, dripping with disdain. For a wedding this extravagant, for my Liam, I expect a proper contribution. Leave a check for $80,000 on our table before you leave. Or better yet, don't bother leaving any gifts at all. The room fell into an immediate, stunned silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Alara felt as though all the air had been sucked from her lungs. Her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. Then a snicker from a far table broke the spell. It quickly spread, blossoming into a ripple of embarrassed, then outright laughter. Faces turned towards Alara, some pitying, some openly amused, others simply horrified. The humiliation was a physical ache, a burning flush that spread from her neck to her cheeks. Liam, who had remained frozen at the head table, finally stirred. He half rose, his face pale, and mumbled, "Bethany, please." His voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the rising tide of laughter. It was a weak, pathetic attempt, and it fell flat, doing nothing to stop his wife's cruel outburst or the guests' mocking mirth. Alara stood there, feeling the weight of every laughing gaze. Her eyes, stinging with unshed tears, scanned the room, landing briefly on Liam's helpless expression, then on Bethany's triumphant, sneering face. A strange calm settled over her. The pain was still there, a sharp shard in her chest, but it was now accompanied by an icy resolve. With a dignity that surprised even herself, Alara straightened her shoulders, a serene, almost detached expression replacing the earlier hurt on her face. She turned her back on the stage, the microphone, and her son's new wife. She walked out of the ballroom, head held high, the laughter following her like a venomous echo down the opulent hallway. It pursued her all the way to the parking lot, where her old Honda, a beacon of reality amidst the luxurious cars, waited patiently. As she fumbled with the keys, her hands, which had only trembled minutes before with nerves, now shook with a quiet, simmering rage. The cold night air was a shock to her flushed cheeks. Sinking into the worn driver's seat, Alara leaned her head back against the faded upholstery. The laughter still rang in her ears, but something else was rising now. A memory, a secret, a profound sense of injustice that demanded rectification. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing the scene again. Bethany's hateful words, Liam's passive silence. Then her eyes snapped open, blazing with a renewed determination. She reached for her phone, her fingers finding a contact saved under a single formal name. She pressed the call button. It rang twice before a deep, calm voice answered. "Arthur, it's Alara," she stated, her voice steady, firm, devoid of any trace of the earlier humiliation. "I think it's time." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Alara, you're sure?" Arthur's tone was cautious, professional, yet carried an undercurrent of understanding, as if he had been expecting this call for a long time. After all this time, a public display like this seems dramatic. "Are you certain this is the path you want to take?" "I am," Alara replied, her gaze fixed on the Grandview Hotel, its facade now appearing less grand, more like a facade indeed. "Prepare the documentation. I want it done. Immediately." The metallic tang of injustice still lingered in Alara's mouth as she sat in her Honda, the engine humming softly, a stark contrast to the thumping bass of the wedding reception music still audible from the Grandview Hotel. The phone call to Arthur had cemented her decision, a resolve that had been hardening for months. 6 months to be exact. 6 months of quiet observation, of biting her tongue, of enduring subtle slights and overt dismissals. 6 months that culminated in the ultimate public humiliation orchestrated by Bethany, with Liam as a passive bystander. She leaned her head back against the worn fabric of her seat, closing her eyes, and the opulent ballroom faded, replaced by the somber interior of a funeral home. It was just over 6 months ago, a crisp autumn day, when Alara had attended the funeral of her Aunt Beatrice. Beatrice, her mother's older sister, had always been a peculiar figure in their family. A woman who defied convention. She never married, never settled into the traditional roles expected of women in her generation. Instead, Beatrice had dedicated her life to her nursing career, tending to the sick with a fierce compassion, and quietly, almost stealthily, pursuing a second passion, real estate. Most of the family considered Aunt Beatrice, with her eclectic tastes and fiercely independent spirit, to be eccentric, to put it mildly. She wore mismatched socks, dyed streaks of purple into her silver hair long before it was fashionable, and spoke her mind with an unapologetic bluntness. Her investments especially were the subject of much bewildered head-shaking. "She's buying properties in those neighborhoods?" her relatives would whisper, aghast when Beatrice would excitedly recount her latest purchase of a rundown duplex in an area everyone else considered undesirable, even dangerous. "She's throwing her money away," her own mother would lament, sighing dramatically over Beatrice's stubborn refusal to invest in what she called sensible stocks or bonds. But Beatrice had possessed a foresight that bordered on prescience. What everyone else dismissed as bad neighborhoods were, years later, undergoing rapid gentrification. The dilapidated houses she'd bought for pennies on the dollar were now charming, sought-after properties in up-and-coming urban districts. Her reckless gambles had, in fact, been brilliant and strategic moves. She had, in her quiet, quirky way, built a considerable fortune. The day of the will reading had been a blur of shock and disbelief for Alara. She had never been particularly close to Beatrice in recent years. Their relationship had always been one of affectionate distance, marked by sporadic phone calls and annual Christmas cards. She certainly hadn't expected to be included in the will beyond a token keepsake, perhaps one of Beatrice's beloved porcelain cat figurines. So when Arthur, Beatrice's longtime attorney, a man with a kind smile and a serious demeanor, had announced that Ilara was named Beatrice's sole heir, a collective gasp had swept through the small room filled with other, more outwardly attentive relatives. Ilara remembered the stunned silence that followed. She could still see the narrowed eyes of her cousins, the barely concealed envy on the faces of aunts and uncles who had always dismissed Beatrice. Arthur had cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles, and continued to read, his voice steady. The properties, the savings, the investments, it all added up, a staggering $2.7 million. The sheer magnitude of the number had rendered Alara speechless, a heavy weight settling in her chest. She remembered feeling a dizzying mix of gratitude, grief, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Arthur had then explained in his precise legal cadence about the properties. "As you know," he had said, "Beatrice had a keen eye for value where others saw none. Those 3 multi-unit buildings on Elm Street, which were considered liabilities just a decade ago, are now prime real estate. The demand in that district has skyrocketed, and her smaller bungalow on Maple Avenue, it's currently valued at 3 times what she paid for it." The numbers had kept flowing, each one a testament to Beatrice's quiet genius. But then Arthur had paused, his gaze softening as he looked at Alara. Beatrice, however, was also a shrewd judge of character, Alara, and she understood human nature, particularly when money was involved. He had picked up a single sheet of paper, his voice lowering slightly, making it clear this was the most crucial part. "Her will includes a specific and rather unusual condition. For a period of 6 months following her passing, you are to keep this inheritance entirely secret. You are not to reveal it to anyone, not even your closest family." Alara remembered her confusion, her brow furrowed. "Secret? But why?" Arthur had offered a small, knowing smile. "Beatrice wished for you to observe, to watch, during these 6 months, how your family treats you without the knowledge of your newfound wealth. She believed that true character, genuine affection, is revealed when there's no expectation of financial gain. She wanted you to see who truly cares for you, Alara, for who you are, not for what you might possess." Alara had initially found the condition strange, almost theatrical. Why would Beatrice put her through such a test? Wouldn't it be simpler, more straightforward, to just accept the inheritance and move on? But as the weeks turned into months, and as she navigated the familiar landscape of family dynamics, the casual invitations, the forgotten birthdays, the unspoken judgments about her modest life, a growing clarity began to emerge. Arthur's words echoed in her mind. She understood human nature. Beatrice, in her wisdom, had crafted a final lesson, a profound test of observation to protect Alara from the very kind of mercenary opportunism she had witnessed that night at the wedding. And now, sitting in her car, Alara knew with chilling certainty that the 6 months were over and the lesson had been learned. The 6 months following Aunt Beatrice's funeral had passed with a quiet, almost insidious cruelty. Alara, holding the secret of her inheritance close, had watched, just as Beatrice had intended. The pattern that unfolded was both heartbreaking and infuriatingly predictable. Liam's visits, once regular and filled with genuine connection, grew increasingly sporadic. When he did come by, usually on his own, his conversation was invariably dominated by the upcoming wedding, the astronomical costs, Bethany's extravagant demands, the pressures of planning such a grand event. His eyes, once full of warmth when he looked at his mother, now seemed perpetually distracted, darting around her modest apartment as if searching for an escape. Bethany, more often than not, didn't bother to accompany him. When she did, her presence was like a cool draft, chilling the air. Her comments, seemingly innocuous to the casual ear, were carefully calibrated to sting. Alara would offer them tea or a slice of the apple pie she'd baked, and Bethany would demur with a polite but pointed, "Oh no, thank you, Alara. I'm trying to be mindful of my sugar intake." For the wedding figure. It wasn't the refusal itself, but the implication, the subtle judgment of Alara's simple, home-cooked offerings. One afternoon, sitting in Alara's cozy living room, Bethany had surveyed the well-worn furniture and the shelves lined with books and family photos. "Alara," she began, her voice dripping with feigned concern, "you really should consider moving to a nicer neighborhood. This area, well, it's just not what it used to be. Liam worries about you." The words were delivered with a casual air, but Alara knew their true meaning. Her neighborhood wasn't nice enough for Liam's future wife. It was an embarrassment. Another time, after Alara had mentioned a minor ache in her knee, Bethany had piped up, "Don't you get tired of cooking for yourself, Alara? All that cleaning, all that maintenance? There are so many lovely senior communities these days, full of activities and meals prepared for you. I hear they have excellent health care too." The suggestion, again, was cloaked in concern, but Alara heard the underlying message loud and clear. She was getting old, she was a burden, and she needed to be conveniently placed out of sight. Alara understood, with a painful clarity, that Bethany viewed her as an embarrassment. Her small apartment, her second-hand car, her modest clothing, her entire second-hand life, as Bethany once subtly phrased it, did not align with the lavish, aspirational image Bethany cultivated for herself and, by extension, for Liam. She was a relic of a past that Bethany wanted to erase, a reminder of a life that lacked the glitter and glamour Bethany so desperately craved. The crescendo of this subtle cruelty arrived 3 weeks before the wedding. Liam and Bethany visited Alara's apartment, an unannounced pop-in that felt more like an inspection. Bethany, dressed in an expensive silk dress, her diamond engagement ring sparkling under the afternoon sun, walked through Alara's small home with barely concealed disdain. Her gaze lingered on the fading wallpaper, the slightly chipped teapot, the lovingly tended potted plants on the windowsill, each item seemingly judged and found wanting. Liam trailed behind her, his shoulders hunched, avoiding Alara's eyes. They settled on the sofa, Bethany perching delicately, as if afraid to truly touch the worn fabric. Liam beside her offered a weak smile. "Alara," Bethany began, her voice firm, no longer bothering with the pretense of casual concern. "After we get back from our honeymoon, Liam and I have been talking, and we really think you should seriously consider selling this place." She gestured vaguely around the living room, as if dismissing it entirely. "It's really too much for you, isn't it? All those stairs, the upkeep, and it's not exactly central to anything, is it?" Alara felt a prickle of alarm. "Selling? But this is my home, Bethany. I've lived here for 30 years. Bethany waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, we know, darling, but times change, and Liam and I want you to be comfortable, safe. We've actually looked into some excellent options. There's a wonderful assisted living facility just outside the city. It's quite charming, with lots of amenities. You'd have your own little apartment, and all your meals would be taken care of. Plus, there's a lovely communal garden." The words assisted living facility hung in the air, a thinly veiled euphemism. Alara knew what it meant, a place for the elderly, for the inconvenient, for those who couldn't care for themselves, or perhaps for those who simply weren't wealthy enough to remain in their own homes. It was Bethany's code for poor and out of the way. Liam finally spoke up, his voice soft, almost apologetic. Mom, she's right. It would give us peace of mind knowing you're safe, well cared for. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. He wouldn't meet her quaternium, instead focusing intently on a loose thread on the armrest of the sofa. His words, delivered without conviction, were the sharpest blow of all. He wasn't defending her, he was endorsing Bethany's plan. He was agreeing that his mother, who had raised him with love and sacrifice, was now a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be managed. Alara looked from Bethany's smug, determined face to Liam's averted, guilty one. The full weight of Beatrice's wisdom settled upon her. This was the observation period, culminating in this blatant act of dismissal. They didn't care about her comfort or her happiness. They cared about appearances, about what was convenient for them. That night, after Liam and Bethany had left, their departure leaving a cold void in her apartment, Alara didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone and dialed Arthur's number. Arthur, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. It's Alara. I need you to prepare the full disclosure documentation. Everything. I want it ready as soon as possible. Arthur's voice was calm, understanding. Are you absolutely certain, Alara? Once this is done, there's no turning back. I am, she affirmed, her gaze sweeping around her beloved, modest home, the place they wanted to rid her of. A slow, determined smile touched her lips. It's time my family learned the truth about my financial situation. As Alara sat in her old Honda, the hum of the engine a comforting drone against the lingering echoes of Bethany's laughter, her phone vibrated. A text message. She opened it, her gaze falling on Arthur's concise words. Everything is ready. The video presentation will begin in approximately 10 minutes. A small, triumphant smile touched Alara's lips. The waiting was over. The stage was set. She pulled down the visor, revealing the small, dusty mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman with slightly flushed cheeks, but eyes that now held a steely glint. She took out a tube of her everyday coral lipstick, carefully outlining her lips, then pressing them together as if sealing a silent vow. She ran a hand over her sensible navy dress, smoothing out imaginary wrinkles. Every movement was deliberate, a ritual of recommitment to the path she had chosen. She would walk back into that room not as the humiliated mother, but as a woman armed with truth, ready to face the consequences, whatever they might be. She would appear strong, even if her heart pounded a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. The walk from the parking lot back to the Grandview Hotel's grand entrance felt like an eternity. Each step crunched on the gravel, a deliberate march toward a destiny she had silently authored. With every stride, memories of Aunt Beatrice flooded her mind. Her unruly purple streaks, her knowing smile, her quiet confidence in the face of family skepticism. Beatrice, everyone had thought, was just an eccentric old woman, barely scraping by on a nurse's pension and a few quirky hobbies. She had been underestimated, dismissed, much like Alara herself had been dismissed tonight. But Beatrice, Alara realized with a surge of pride, had always had the last laugh. Her legacy wasn't just money, it was a profound, enduring lesson in character. Alara thought of the meticulous proof of assets Arthur had compiled, the deeds to the now valuable properties, the detailed bank statements, the investment portfolios. It was all there, irrefutable evidence of a fortune amassed by a woman whom no one had truly seen. In Beatrice's condition, the 6-month silence now seemed less like a test and more like a gift. A gift of clarity. A chance to see the true colors of those around her when they believed she had nothing to offer, nothing to gain. The humiliation of the past months, the casual dismissals, the cutting remarks, Bethany's public shaming, they were all now just pieces of the puzzle, confirming Beatrice's profound wisdom. As she reached the opulent glass doors of the hotel, the uniformed doorman, who had previously watched her park her old Honda, with a polite but discernible air of indifference, held the door open. He offered a practiced smile. Everything all right, madam? Alara met his gaze, a genuine, if somewhat enigmatic, smile gracing her lips. Perfect, she said, and for the first time that night, she truly meant it. The familiar boisterous sounds of the reception washed over her as she re-entered the ballroom. The music was vibrant, the conversation lively, the clinking of glasses a celebratory symphony. Her gaze immediately sought out the head table. There she was, Bethany, still radiating self-satisfaction, her head thrown back in a peal of laughter, her hand resting possessively on Liam's arm. She was still basking in the glow of her earlier takedown, confident in her victory, oblivious to the seismic shift that was about to occur. Liam, as before, seemed oblivious, or perhaps willfully ignorant, his attention solely focused on his new wife. Alara quietly, almost imperceptibly, slid back into her seat at table 7. The elderly aunt and distant cousin, who had witnessed her earlier departure, looked at her with surprise, then a flicker of concern, but said nothing. Alara offered them a small, reassuring smile, her expression serene. Just as the band finished a particularly lively tune, the lead singer, a man with a booming voice and a perfectly coiffed haircut, stepped forward. All right, everyone, he announced, his voice amplified by the sound system. We've had some incredible toasts and heartwarming dances, but now for a very special, unexpected presentation. We have something truly unique to share with all of you, prepared especially for our beautiful couple, Liam and Bethany. A hush began to fall over the room, a collective ripple of curiosity replacing the earlier merriment. Liam and Bethany exchanged confused glances. Bethany's brow furrowed, a slight frown marring her perfect composure. She turned to Liam, whispering, "What is this, Liam? You didn't mention any special presentation." Liam merely shrugged, looking equally bewildered. Then, with a dramatic whirring sound, a massive projection screen began to descend from the ceiling at the front of the ballroom, slowly unfurling until it dominated the space. The ambient lights in the room dimmed further, casting the room in a soft, anticipatory glow. Alara felt her heart pound, a powerful drumbeat beneath her ribs. But strangely, her hands, resting on the tablecloth, remained perfectly steady. She watched the screen, waiting, and then it flickered to life. This is where things get really interesting. If you're captivated by what's happening, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss how this story unfolds. Now back to the drama. The grand projection screen flickered, then burst to life, bathing the stunned reception hall in a brilliant, unforgiving light. The image that appeared was a pristine, opulent bridal salon, sunlight streaming through tall windows, racks of glistening white gowns in the background. And then, her voice, unmistakably Bethany's, clear and resonant, filled every corner of the room, magnified by the professional sound system. The clip showed Bethany, radiant in a half-laced wedding gown, spinning playfully in front of a mirror, while two of her bridesmaids and her mother watched, giggling. The scene was innocuous enough, a typical bridal moment. Then Bethany turned to her friends, her perfect smile morphing into a conspiratorial smirk. "God, you should see his mother's apartment," Bethany began, her voice dropping slightly, but still perfectly audible. She rolled her eyes for emphasis. "It's like stepping back into 1980. The faded wallpaper, the floral sofa that looks like it came from a garage sale, the tiny ancient kitchen. I mean, it's just old. It's embarrassing, honestly, for our family image, especially with all the people we'll be entertaining." Her friends offered a chorus of sympathetic yet equally disdainful giggles. Bethany paused, taking a sip from a flute of champagne handed to her by a salon assistant. "Liam keeps making excuses about her fixed income, but honestly, I just don't get it. Doesn't she realize how it makes us look? I really think we need to push for her to move into one of those senior homes after the wedding. It would be a mercy, really, for her, of course." The last words were delivered with a sugary sweetness that was utterly chilling. A collective gasp rippled through the reception hall. The comfortable hum of conversation that had returned for a moment died completely, replaced by an uneasy silence. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Alara felt a familiar tightness in her chest, but it was no longer pain. It was a cold, hard resolve. She glanced at Liam and Bethany. Liam's face was agile, his jaw slack. Bethany, rigid beside him, her eyes wide with disbelief, looked like a deer caught in headlights. The video seamlessly transitioned to the next clip. The scene changed to a sun-drenched patio at a luxurious country club, the clinking of expensive china in the background. Bethany was seated at a table with her mother and sister, elegantly dressed, sipping iced tea. On the table between them lay a small silver-framed picture, clearly an engagement gift. "And look at this," Bethany said, picking up the frame with two manicured fingers, as if it were contaminated. "This is what Liam's mother gave us as an engagement gift." This, she held it up, displaying it for her mother and sister, a dramatic sigh escaping her lips. A $20 picture frame from a department store clearance rack, I'm sure. Can you believe it? For her son's engagement. It's just so cheap. She dropped the frame back onto the table with a dismissive clatter. Her mother, ever the conspirator, nodded sympathetically. "Oh, darling, that's just dreadful. So tacky." "And Liam keeps trying to defend her," Bethany continued, her voice rising in exasperation. "He says, 'Oh, mom's on a fixed income, Bethany. She tries her best. But I'm sorry, she's just cheap. It's not about income, it's about effort, about presenting oneself appropriately. I mean, we're building a brand, a family image, and she's just dragging us down." Bethany's sister, a woman with eyes as sharp as her mother's, leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "You know, sometimes people who claim to be poor are actually the ones hiding money. My friend's aunt did that, lived in a rundown house 4 years, then turned out to have millions stashed away." Bethany scoffed, a derisive laugh escaping her lips. "Alara? Hiding money? Oh, please. You should see her apartment. It's not run down, it's like a thrift store exploded in a time capsule. She barely replaces her clothes and her car is ancient. There's nothing to hide. She's just pathetic in her poverty." She took another sip of tea, her gaze hardened. "And Liam defending her, it's so frustrating. It's like he doesn't understand the kind of life we're building, the image we need to project." The silence in the ballroom was now absolute, thick with a palpable tension. The earlier festive atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by a stunned, uncomfortable pall. Guests avoided eye contact, some looking down at their plates, others stealing horrified glances at Liam and Bethany. Alara watched, a grim satisfaction settling in her heart. This was the truth, unvarnished and undeniable, laid bare for all to see. The mask had slipped, and the true character of her son's new wife, and by extension, her son, was now on full display. The screen flickered, ready for the next revelation. The atmosphere in the ballroom was now glacial, the air thick with disbelief and palpable discomfort. The screen shifted again, the scene now focused on Bethany's meticulously decorated apartment, an antithesis to Alara's modest home. Bethany was on the phone, pacing agitatedly across a plush rug, her voice, sharp and frustrated, filling the now silent room. "Honestly, Mother, I don't know what we're going to do," Bethany lamented, her hand gesturing wildly as she spoke. "She's going to be a constant embarrassment. Can you imagine introducing her to the partners at Liam's firm, or my family's friends from the club? With her everything, her clothes, her car, that dreadful apartment, it's simply not going to work for the image we need to project." She paused, listening to her mother's unseen reply, then scoffed. "Money? Mom, please. Alara doesn't have any money. Liam says she's been living on a shoestring budget for years. She probably has less than $5,000 to her name. She can't even afford to replace her chipped dishes, let alone contribute to anything substantial." Her voice hardened, laced with undisguised contempt. "I didn't marry Liam to become a charity case for his pathetic mother. We have our own life to build, our own future to secure. I will not have her poverty dragging us down." Alara sat at her table, the words pathetic, charity case, and embarrassment hitting her like physical blows, each one a hammer blow to her dignity. Yet there was no pain now, only a chilling confirmation of what she had suspected. This was the truth, delivered by Bethany's own mouth, raw and unadorned. She glanced around the room, Heads were shaking, some in disgust, others in pity. Many guests were now openly turning in their chairs, their gazes flicking from the screen to Alara, then to Liam and Bethany at the head table. Liam's face was a ghostly white, his eyes fixed on the screen in a mixture of horror and dawning realization. Bethany, meanwhile, looked utterly mortified, her earlier confident smirk replaced by a gaping, horrified expression. The video then cut to the final, most damning clip. The setting was again Bethany and Liam's apartment, but this time the tension was palpable. Liam was seated on a sofa, looking weary, while Bethany stood over him, her arms crossed, her expression stern and uncompromising. "Your mother is becoming a real problem, Liam," Bethany stated, her voice tight with exasperation. "We've talked about this. Her presence, her situation, it simply doesn't fit with our social standing. When we have children, I don't want them to be exposed to that kind of poverty, that kind of environment. And frankly, I don't want her making appearances next to my family at charity galas or important events. It just looks bad." Liam, his shoulders slumped, offered a weak defense. "Bethany, she's doing her best. She raised me on her own. She sacrificed so much. And her apartment, it's always been her home." Bethany snapped, her patience clearly at an end. "Her best isn't good enough, Liam. She doesn't have resources, which means she's going to be our responsibility forever. Don't you see that? Do you truly want to support your mother for the rest of your life? Pay for her bills, her medical care, her housing? Because that's exactly what will happen if we don't set boundaries now." Her voice rose, becoming more emphatic. "You need to make it clear to her. We are not her financial safety net. She needs to understand that we are starting our own life, our own family. She needs to take care of herself on her own." The words hung in the air, a cruel, undeniable testament to Bethany's true feelings. They weren't just about Alara's financial state. They were about her value as a human being, as a mother, as a part of their lives. She was a burden, a problem, a liability to be managed and, if possible, discarded. Then, with a final jarring click, the screen went black. The sudden darkness, following the harsh illumination of Bethany's contempt, plunged the entire reception hall into an even deeper, more profound silence. The only sounds were the faint hum of the air conditioning and the rapid, shallow breaths of the shocked guests. Bethany sat at the head table, her face ashen, drained of all color, her eyes wide and unblinking. Her carefully constructed facade had crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. Beside her, Liam stared at her, his expression a horrifying mix of shock, betrayal, and dawning disgust. The man who had been so happy, so oblivious just moments before, now looked utterly shattered. The impact of the revelations was undeniable, reverberating through the stunned room. The moment of truth had arrived. The silence was broken by Liam's voice, barely a whisper, yet it cut through the heavy air like a knife. "Bethany," he said, his eyes fixed on her. "What the hell was that?" Bethany jolted as if awakened from a nightmare. Her face, still ashen, contorted into a mask of indignation. "Privacy. This is an invasion of privacy. This is illegal. Someone recorded me without my consent." Her words, however, lacked conviction, dissolving in the stunned silence of the room. She looked around desperately, seeking an ally, but found only averted gazes and shocked faces. Murmurs began to rise from the tables, a low, buzzing sound that slowly started to coalesce. The mood had shifted dramatically. The initial ridicule Alara had endured had morphed into a collective pity, mixed with disgust for Bethany. People were now looking at Alara with a dawning understanding and at Bethany with contempt. It was too much for Bethany. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and with a soft groan, she abruptly collapsed. Her head hit the head table with a sickening thud, sending crystal glasses scattering and shattering across the linen. The tiered wedding cake, a masterpiece of sugar flowers and delicate icing, teetered precariously before toppling over, collapsing into a sugary, creamy ruin. Chaos erupted. A collective cry of alarm swept through the room. Liam, galvanized into action, rushed to Bethany's side, frantically calling her name. Bethany's mother, a woman who had previously lectured on decorum, let out a piercing shriek and began screaming for someone to call 911. The country club staff, highly trained for such emergencies, swiftly moved in, trying to manage the unfolding crisis, directing guests and attempting to tend to Bethany. Through it all, Alara remained seated at table 7, a quiet, almost serene observer. She watched the pandemonium unfold, the shattered glass, the ruined cake, the panicked faces. A grim satisfaction settled in her heart. This, she thought, was Bethany's consequence, a consequence for her cruelty, her disdain, her monumental arrogance. Slowly, amidst the frantic whispers and the clatter of staff, Bethany stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, her gaze unfocused at first, then sharpening as memory returned. She saw the ruined cake, the shattered glasses, and the horrified faces of her own family. She tried to sit up, groaning softly. "Who did this?" she whispered, her voice hoarse, still clinging to the notion of victimhood. "Who illegally recorded me? This is a violation. I'm going to sue them all." Liam, however, was no longer looking at Bethany with concern. His face was a thundercloud, his eyes blazing with a raw, undeniable anger. "Who did this?" he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Bethany, what about what you did? You called my mother pathetic. You said she was an embarrassment. You wanted to put her in a home. You told me not to be her financial safety net." His voice rose with each accusation, filled with a fury born of shame and betrayal. It was at this moment that Alara finally spoke, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the residual chaos like a bell. "Like you discussed me privately, Bethany?" she asked, her gaze unwavering, as she looked directly at Liam's new wife. Alara rose from her seat, her movements deliberate, unhurried. The guests, those who hadn't already fled in embarrassment or shock, turned to watch her. She walked slowly toward the head table, a folded piece of paper held carefully in her hand. As she reached the table, she held up the document. It was a recent bank statement, crisp and official. "As of this morning," Alara stated, her voice resonating with quiet authority, "my checking account balance is $2.7 million. The room plunged back into an absolute deafening silence. Even the country club staff paused their cleanup, their eyes wide. Bethany, now fully conscious, stared at the bank statement, then at Alara, her mouth hanging open. That's impossible," she stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. "It is not impossible, Bethany," Alara corrected, her voice calm. "It is the inheritance from my Aunt Beatrice." She then proceeded to explain, in concise, precise terms, about Beatrice's will, about the astonishing legacy, and about the crucial 6-month observation condition. Aunt Beatrice believed that true character reveals itself when people think you have nothing. She wanted me to see who truly cared for me, not for what I might possess. Liam's head snapped up, a flash of understanding, then crushing shame, crossing his face. She was testing us?" he murmured, the words barely audible. Bethany, now a sickly shade of green, stared at Alara with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "You've been rich this whole time?" she whispered, the enormity of her miscalculation sinking in. "Rich enough," Alara confirmed, her gaze steady, "to have paid for this entire wedding, had I chosen to do so." Bethany's father, a grim-faced man who had just rushed over, having seen the cake disaster in the video's aftermath, turned to his daughter, his voice low and dangerous. "Bethany Marie, what have you done?" Bethany tried to stammer out an apology, a conciliatory word, anything to salvage the wreckage. "Alara, I didn't know. I can explain. It was all a misunderstanding." But Liam cut her off, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Just stop talking, Bethany." He turned to Alara, his eyes filled with genuine remorse. "Mom, I am so sorry. For everything. For not defending you. For letting her, I should have stood up for you." Alara nodded, accepting his apology without comment. She then produced another document from her bag, one she had retrieved from Arthur just before returning to the reception. It was a copy of Aunt Beatrice's complete will, a section highlighted in yellow. "Aunt Beatrice," Alara began, her voice carrying through the silent hall, was very specific in her intentions for her family trust. She wanted her legacy to be a reward for kindness, for dignity, for genuine affection. She wrote, and I quote, "My niece Alara is to inherit my entire estate, to be used to uplift her life and to share with those who demonstrate true care and respect for her without expectation of financial gain. Ilara paused, then continued, her voice hardening slightly. However, she read, her eyes sweeping over the devastated Bethany, if Ilara observes cruelty, manipulation, or avarice from any family member during the 6-month observation period, she is to donate the entire inheritance, less a small stipend for her personal needs, to charitable organizations of her choosing. Bethany sank back into her chair, her face utterly defeated. The money, it was lost. All of it. The silence in the reception hall was deafening. Ilara finished reading Aunt Beatrice's will. She then folded the document with precise movements. Therefore, Ilara stated, her voice resonating through the shocked room, with the exception of a modest personal stipend, I will be donating most of the inheritance, approximately $2.2 million, to various charities dedicated to fostering independence and dignity for the elderly. She paused, looking directly at Liam. A trust fund of $500,000 will also be established for any future grandchildren I might have. However, access to this fund will be strictly conditional upon those grandchildren demonstrating genuine kindness, respect, and empathy towards all people, especially their elders, without prejudice or expectation of gain. This will be monitored and determined by an independent trustee. Liam looked stunned, the implications washing over him. The future of his hypothetical children, his lineage, now hinged on a moral compass he had allowed to become so twisted. Bethany, her voice still raspy, found a desperate surge of energy. This is a misunderstanding. You can't do this. You're destroying everything. Ilara's voice hardened, losing any trace of its earlier composure. A misunderstanding, Bethany? Perhaps this will clarify things. She reached into her small purse and pulled out another small device. With a click, the reception hall was once again filled with sound, but this time it was an audio recording. It was Bethany's voice, clear as a bell, from just 3 weeks ago. Your mother is becoming a real problem, Liam. We need to get her into an assisted living facility. We can't have her living like that. It's an embarrassment. And then Liam's soft, acquiescing reply. She's doing her best, Bethany. Followed by Bethany's cutting retort. She doesn't have resources, which means she's going to be our responsibility forever. Do you truly want to support your mother for the rest of your life? The recording clicked off, plunging the room into a final, irreversible silence. Ilara looked at Liam, her eyes full of a pain she could no longer hide. You, she said, her voice trembling slightly, were planning to have me committed to a nursing home, to clear me out of your new, perfect life. Liam's face crumpled. He sank into his chair, covering his face with his hands, tears streaming down his cheeks. He wasn't just ashamed of Bethany, he was ashamed of himself, of his complicity, of his utter failure as a son. You're destroying our marriage over some stupid test, Bethany shrieked, tears of rage and frustration now streaming down her face. I was drunk. I was emotional. Those were just stupid mistakes. Drunk? Ilara scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Was your disdain at my apartment a mistake? Was mocking my engagement gift a mistake? Was publicly shaming me for an $80,000 check a mistake? Those weren't mistakes, Bethany. They were revelations. Bethany turned desperately to Liam, reaching for his arm. Liam, tell her. Tell her this isn't true. Tell her you love me. Liam slowly lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. He looked at Bethany, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time. I don't think I ever really knew you, he said, his voice raw with sorrow and disillusionment. With a heart-wrenching sob scream, Bethany tore her hand away, pushing her chair back violently. Her elaborate wedding dress, now smeared with cake and wine, dragged behind her as she fled the reception hall, a trail of destruction in her wake. Ilara walked over to Liam, who was still slumped in his chair, his shoulders shaking. She pulled out a card, not her own, but Arthur's. This is my attorney's card, Liam, she said softly. You need to figure out who you are, separate from her, separate from what you think you should be. You have a chance to change. 6 months later, Ilara's apartment remained largely unchanged. Her cherished books still lined the shelves. Her comfortable, if worn, furniture still invited rest. Divorce documents, finalized a month prior, sat in a neat stack on her kitchen counter, a stark reminder of the wedding that never truly was. The charitable donations had been executed swiftly. $2.2 million now supported various organizations championing elderly independence and fighting for their dignity. The Beatrice Hartwell Children's Trust held its $500,000, awaiting the arrival of any future, truly deserving, grandchildren. Liam had called 3 days after the wedding, distraught. Bethany had packed her bags and left the marital apartment that very night, never to return. The divorce was swift and brutal. Bethany's prenuptial agreement, meticulously crafted by her own family, coupled with the court-recorded video, ensured a quick and unambiguous settlement. Bethany had moved back in with her parents, claiming privacy violation trauma and refusing to speak to anyone who had attended the wedding. Liam, humbled and heartbroken, had moved back into his old, smaller apartment. He called Alara weekly, their conversations initially awkward, strained with unexpressed regret. Liam, Alara had advised him one evening, you need to stop trying to impress people. Stop trying to live up to someone else's idea of success. Just figure out who Liam is without the pressure. One sunny afternoon, Jennifer Martinez from the local Riverside Community Center, one of the primary beneficiaries of Beatrice's donation, visited Alara. Over tea, Jennifer revealed a profound secret. Mrs. Hayes, she began, I wanted to tell you something. Your Aunt Beatrice, she was a silent benefactor to our center for years, and she had been secretly watching you volunteer, watching your quiet kindness with the seniors for a very long time. She said your dedication inspired her to make her largest donation. Jennifer then explained that Beatrice had established a volunteer recognition fund in Alara's honor, a fund that would annually award dedicated volunteers. Alara, Jennifer announced with a warm smile, was the very first recipient. It was then holding the small engraved plaque that Alara fully understood. Beatrice had seen her, truly seen her worth, all along. Not her financial status, but her genuine heart. A few days later, Liam called. Mom, he said, his voice sounding lighter than she had heard it in months. I've been going to therapy, and I think I'm starting to get it. Bethany didn't turn me into someone I wasn't. She just revealed who I already was beneath all the ambition and the desire to impress. She showed me the parts of myself I didn't want to see. He then added, a hint of awe in his voice, Mrs. Patterson from the community center told me about all your kindnesses, all the things you do quietly, without expecting anything in return. I never truly appreciated you. He paused, then continued, Can we have dinner, Mom? No pretenses, no pressure. Just talk? Alara agreed, not to pretend that everything was fine, but because Liam might finally understand. At dinner, Liam looked at her, a genuine, loving pride shining in his eyes. Mom, he said, I'm so proud of you. Not because of Aunt Beatrice's money, but because of who you are when you think no one important is watching. That's what truly matters. Later that night, Alara sat in her modest apartment, a small, worn letter in her hand. It was from Beatrice, tucked into the will. The people who love you for who you are, Beatrice had written in her spidery hand, will love you regardless of your circumstances. And the people who don't aren't worthy of your energy. Alara smiled, looking around her quiet, comfortable home. She was rich in the ways that mattered most, free from the burden of proving her worth to anyone.